What's up, everyone? We're about to get into our race day updates for round number 6 at Detroit. Those good old days where the injury update list was nice and short have come and gone, so we have a lot to talk about there. With so many riders out, it's really changing the landscape of the championship. We've had 9 different winners in 10 races. So I'm going to get you guys all up to speed on the landscape and the way things are shaping up now, and also highlight some of the underlying storylines that you may not know about. There's also a pretty drastic change to the schedule this week, so we'll talk about that. And I don't normally bring my personal life into these videos, but this week I saw an F-18 crash right in front of me. So at the very end of the video, if you guys are interested, stick around for that and I'll talk about that. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about is going to be our injury updates, and starting off at the 250 class. Unfortunately, last weekend we did see Pierce Brown go down while leading the main event. He ended up clipping a tough block on the right side, and that sent him flipping into the whoop section. Unfortunately, that did lead to a red flag that stopped the race, and they had to cart him off. Thankfully, he did give us a thumbs up, so we knew that he was relatively okay. He at least had movement of his upper extremities. So as of now, the update is that he did end up breaking his back. He fractured his T5. He's undergone surgery, so obviously he will not be racing with us this weekend or anytime soon. The recovery time is not really specified at this time. At this point, we're just hoping for a full recovery and that he can return to racing at some point. Really hate to see that for him. It looked like he was riding really well, and it looked like that Star Yamaha could be the cure to his bad starts as he was leading the race. So it looked like it could be a really good season for him. Again, really hate to see it, but that's his update. And then his teammate Daxton Bennick unfortunately also ended up getting injured this week in a practice crash. He did suffer a concussion, and he also got penalized. Even though he finished second last weekend, he did jump on a red cross flag light. So unfortunately, based off of his teammate crashing and the red flag coming out, he did hit a Supercross triple. Unfortunately, that docked him some points, but either way, he's going to be out this weekend as well with a concussion. He should be able to return to the series when we go back to the East Coast. But between those two setbacks, unfortunately, that pretty much completely derails the good start to the season that he had. And then another new injury update for that same class is going to be that Lorenzo Lucorciuo did end up breaking his finger in Tampa, but he did see Joe Shimoda on the West Coast racing with a broken finger, and he's like, you know what, I'm not going to have any excuses. So he will be lining up this weekend with the broken finger. As I was recording this video, it came out that Nate Thrasher did have a practice crash and he broke his finger. Sounds like it was probably a bike issue, so interesting times for the Star Yamaha crew. They just lost everybody but Max Anstie for this week. Actually, it sounds like Nate Thrasher might try to race with a broken finger. That seems to be the trend right now. But either way, he does have a broken finger. Then I just want to give a quick shout out to the guys in the class that we already know are injured, which would be Casey Cochran, who's still out with his leg, Devin Simonson, who should be returning relatively soon with his wrist injury, and then of course Swoll, who tore his Achilles tendon, and we do not expect to be seeing back anytime soon. And then I also wanted to give a quick shout out to Anthony Bourdon, who's racing on the West Coast, but it sounds like he absolutely destroyed himself in a practice crash this week. He ended up injuring his hip, his pelvis, and his back. Really hate to see that for the BarX guys. Really hate to see that for Anthony Bourdon. He was off to another good start to his season after having a good season last year. So definitely really unfortunate. You never want to see somebody get hurt like that, but especially when they're doing a good effort on a privateer type of team. Next, we got to move on to the 450 class. So first, we're going to talk about Eli Tomac. We all saw that practice incident. My first impression was that he ended up re-injuring that Achilles tendon. Then we got to see him walk away from the track, so that kind of went out the window. It was clear that he was definitely injured, but the extent of his injuries was unknown. Later, it came out that he would still be competing, and everybody got kind of optimistic. And then as the night went on, it was clear that he was definitely suffering a major setback, and the picture was pretty blurry for him. Anyways, as the week went on, it came out that he did end up breaking his leg. He did fracture his tibia, so he will be out. It's not really clear at this point if he's having surgery or when he will be returning, but he's not going to be racing this weekend. But I just quickly want to break this down a little bit further. So he did go in and get x-rays with the Alpine Star medical crew after practice, and they cleared him saying that everything checked out. And now we do have pictures of what his leg looks like after the race, and you can see that that tibia is displaced. So I don't care who you are, but you would never have missed that on the first x-ray. And that tells me that it must have been a very small hairline fracture when he first had the injury, and that's why they probably missed it. And as you can see in the x-ray after the race, it's far from that. So with that information right there, that pretty much means that that man was actively racing with a fractured leg, that he was actively braking further and further throughout the race, displacing his bone. That's really gnarly. I can't believe he did that. He was going through the whoop section with only one leg on the foot pegs, his broken leg just floating through the air. This man is an absolute beast. We already know that, but he absolutely re-solidified that this last weekend. Really hate that he's out. Hopefully, he can come back for maybe the end of Supercross, but more than likely, it's probably not going to be until Motocross that we see him. Either way, get well soon, Eli. Then we also saw Hunter Lawrence go down, and he didn't end up making the main event. So it has come out that he did end up injuring his shoulder. He tore his labrum and cracked his humerus, so he will not be returning for Supercross this season. And that leaves Factory Honda with no 450 rider. If they do not get a fill-in rider, that means that is 11 rounds with no Premier Supercross rider. I can't imagine them doing that. I do expect them to grab a fill-in rider. To me, there's two obvious fill-in choices, which would be either Dylan Ferrandis or Joey Savacci. Both of them are already on Hondas. Dylan's on Phoenix Honda and Joey Savacci on Quadlock Honda. So keep your eye on that situation. I do kind of expect one of them to end up racing for Factory Honda during the Supercross season. So as I was recording, Daniel Blair did end up reporting that Vince Friese was offered the temporary fill-in job for Factory Honda and that he turned it down. So a double head scratcher there. I'm not exactly sure why they would go to Vince Friese, and I'm not sure why he would turn it down. But Daniel Blair is pretty reliable, and he's definitely somebody who would know if that happened. So interesting little tidbit there. Also, it would be kind of interesting if they do end up grabbing Dylan Ferrandis and he does fairly well. And the fact that he's a past 450 outdoor champion, do they just keep him on for the remainder of the season as the Lawrence brothers come back and really try to dominate the outdoor season? And then speaking of Dylan Ferrandis, he did end up missing Tampa, but it sounds like he's going to be back this weekend. He's definitely banged up, but keep your eye out for him. And then as far as Christian Craig, there was some hope that he could be joining the series these last couple of weeks, but it sounds like he's going to be out until at least Indianapolis. He is still healing up from that ACL reconstruction. And then I also want to give a quick shout out to Cade Clason, who did end up breaking his arm, so it looks like he's going to be out for a bit. And then speaking of arms, we got to also shout out Tristan Lane, who ended up getting tangled up with Ken Roczen. He was just kind of a bystander in that lapper situation. We saw Ken Roczen dart under his front wheel and it kind of knocked the bike out from under him. And he absolutely decimated his arm on Ken Roczen's bars on his way down. I'm not sure how, but he did not end up breaking his arm. He's definitely banged up. He will be racing this weekend. He did partially tear his labrum, but either way, he's going to be out there. And then, of course, we were missing Freddie Norren last weekend. It sounds like he's going to be racing this weekend. He did dislocate his shoulder in Glendale. It's not 100% clear whether or not he's racing. It's still kind of up in the air, but it looks like he's in Detroit and his plan is to give it a go. And last, I just want to give a quick moment of silence to Jorge Prado and Jet Lawrence, who we all already know are injured and out. But let's just not forget the guys of the sport who have gone down. And now we're going to move on to our 250 top contenders. So at the top, we have Max Anstie. Last weekend, he had an absolutely perfect day, winning the heat race. He was the fastest qualifier, and then we saw him get out in front in that main event. He did end up losing the lead momentarily, but then obviously we all know what happened, and he ended up winning the main event. There were some people who were pretty much calling him to be the favorite coming into the season, and while I did expect him to do fairly well, I was a little bit skeptical of his consistency, and I am still waiting to see if he can prove that, but as of right now, it's hard to argue that he's the favorite. He put himself in an absolutely fantastic position, well ahead of the defending champions, and pretty much everybody that we had as championship contenders besides him. And then on top of that, he is already up to a 5-point lead after one race, and the guy who is in second has a torn ACL. Nothing against Cameron, but you cannot say that Max has not positioned himself absolutely fabulously. Then right behind him, like I was just saying, we have Cameron McAdoo, who did finish third overall last weekend, but due to the penalty to Daxton Bennick and the fact that he's not racing this weekend, he has now moved himself into second in the championship. Absolutely gutsy ride last weekend. He definitely surprised me. I was very skeptical of whether or not he should even be trying to race, but he definitely proved me wrong, at least for this last weekend. He is going to try to race the entirety of the Supercross season, and if he does that, I would expect he'll probably keep trying to push it until his knee blows up. Really don't want to see that for him. I think it would be great if he could just get through Supercross and then get it repaired. He is obviously running a knee brace, and he does not allow that knee brace to go fully straight. It is locked out. So that does offer him some sense of stability, but at the end of the day, all it is one leg dab away from a total catastrophic knee injury. Wishing Cameron the best. Hopefully he can keep the ball rolling. Then right behind him, we have his teammate Seth Hammaker. So Seth definitely surprised me as well. I definitely know he has the speed. He is a past race winner, and he is one of the guys, but he looked really consistent, a lot more than I was expecting. He looked good in practice, he looked good in qualifying, he looked good in the heat race, and he looked really good in the main event. Could he be a bit of surprise this year and be a real championship contender? Definitely worth keeping an eye on. Then behind him, we have Tom Vialle, who is currently tied with Daxton Bennick in the points, but like I said, Daxton will not be racing this weekend, so he's definitely going to be moving ahead of him. So just strictly going off of last year, if we throw everything that we've seen so far this year out of the window, I would say that he's your closest title threat to Max Anstie right now. It's definitely possible that McAdoo and Hammaker could develop into title threats, but either way, he's definitely close. He got off to a much better start this season than last season. I believe he got 17th at the opening round last year, and he still won the title, so do not count him out. He's a 3-time champion if you count his MXGP titles. He knows how to be consistent. He knows how to limit his mistakes. Do not underestimate him. With that being said, it did seem like he lacked the top end speed that it needs to run in this class, especially with how deep it is right now. Then behind him, we have Chance Hymas, who is fresh off of that ACL reconstruction. I personally voiced my opinion that I think he's returning a little bit too quickly, but he definitely looked a lot better than I was expecting. My main concern is that he's just at a high risk for re-injuring that same ACL for the 3rd time. Really don't want to see that for him. He's so young and he has such a long career ahead of him if he can manage it correctly. Definitely hope he stays healthy. He looks really good. He looks better than he looked at Supercross last year, so let's try to keep that ball rolling. Look for him to do good this weekend. And then behind him, we have to talk about Cullin Park, who ended up sending Austin Forkner for a ride in the main event. He was your rookie of the year in Supercross when he made his pro debut, so he knows how to do it over a full season and he knows how to ride Supercross. Nothing new here. It's easy to kind of forget about him since he kind of crashed out at the beginning of Supercross last year and we have not seen him race Supercross in a long time, but he's definitely capable. Keep your eye on him. Then behind him in the points, we have Nate Thrasher, who definitely looked like the least prepared Star Yamaha rider. Whether that was just based off of his start or if he's actually having issues is hard to say, but this is kind of what we've seen throughout his career. He'll be barely inside the top 10 and then just win a race and then top 5, top 10, podium. So he's kind of all over the board. I was hoping that he may have fixed that this year. As of right now, it does not look like he has, but don't count him out. He could still win a race this year. He could have the speed, so just keep your eye on him. He's kind of a wild card. After him, we have Levi Kitchen, who did have a little bit of a concerning weekend last weekend, definitely coming in as one of the title threats. We do know that he had to switch coasts due to that illness, and I have to wonder if he's still dealing with some sort of illness or side effects or some lingering effects, I guess. If that's the case, hopefully he can get through this weekend with another solid top 10 finish and come out swinging in a couple of weeks when we go back east again. Or maybe that was just a fluky race and he can come out swinging this weekend, which would be really cool to see. He's already really established himself as a top contender and proven the fact that he has the speed and the consistency, so I don't feel like this is normal for Levi Kitchen. We're definitely going to want to keep our eye on him tonight. Then rounding out our top 10 of the points, we have Carson Mumford, who I was pretty excited to see how he could do this season. I definitely had some relatively high expectations for him. I do kind of expect him to be around that 5 to 10 range, but look for him to have some better results as the season goes on. And now I just quickly want to touch on a couple of the guys outside the top 10. Firstly, we got to talk about Austin Forkner, who seemed to be salvaging a relatively good finish until, like I said, he did get bumped by Cullin Park, and he ended up finishing 17th. Sounds like he was pretty under the weather, and on top of that, I don't think he wanted to start off his season with an injury. Looked like he was riding a little cautious out there as well, and he definitely got the wind taken out of his sails once he did end up going down. Look for him to definitely bounce back this weekend. Hopefully he can do something closer to a top 5. I was speculating that he could be a title threat coming into the season, and now I'm not so sure, mostly based off of the fact that he's way back in the points already. It will be interesting to see how well he bounces back, and then we do have a break after this, so maybe he can rebuild some more and come back swinging even more when we go back East Coast for the second time. And then, of course, RJ Hampshire had a pretty rough night as well. We saw him end up landing on one of those big circle tough blocks, and he got stuck. Really hate to see that for RJ. he didn't get to race his West Coast series and try to defend his title. It seems like he kind of brought that one on himself by doing that thing where he ended up landing on the tough block in the first place. But he got absolutely screwed by the red flag, in my opinion. I definitely think he would have been a lot closer to a top 15 finish without the red flag. But with the staggered restart, he remained a lap down and was still forced to start at the very end of the field, meaning that the only way he could possibly pass anybody is if he essentially lapped somebody. With how little time there was left in the race, it pretty much meant, hey RJ, you're getting exactly where you're at right now. Personally, I would like to see a rule change when it comes to that. It definitely affected his championship chase. I think you should either be allowed to line up in the staggered restart where you were on the track at the time of the red flag, or if you'd rather have them line up at the back of the pack, since generally lappers would be in the way of a staggered restart, then let's just put everybody who was still racing all on the lead lap. That way they can have a chance to at least battle for positions and not be essentially locked into that spot. Or maybe a better way of saying it would be you get one lap back. So say if there's a guy that's 2 laps down, he's not just getting all of his laps back and just, or 7, 8 laps down that had a catastrophic failure. He can't just jump back in and be like, no, I'm good, and still get a top 10. We've seen rules like that be successful in NASCAR, where you get a lap back under a restart condition. And even if they did have RJ starting at the back of the field, if he was at least on the same lap as the riders he was around, he would have finished much, much higher and been able to salvage his championship hopes. So he's definitely not out of the title chase yet, but definitely a very rough start to a season. With how many guys there are ahead of him right now that are all contenders, it's hard to imagine that he can win the title at this point, but he's, like I said, not out of it yet. And one last 250 guy I want to talk about, and that's going to be Max Vohland. He looked like he was riding pretty well. He definitely had some speed. We know he has that nerve issue in his leg, and unfortunately, it sounds like his brake broke and he was unable to finish the race. Like we've talked about, he does have his rear brake on the handlebars, and it sounds like that malfunctioned. Look for him to bounce back this weekend as well. And with that, let's go ahead and get into our top contenders for the 450 class. So at the top, we have Chase Sexton holding the red plate once again, and pretty cool to see KTM holding 2 out of the 3 red plates right now. They had all 3 last week with Tom Vialle, but obviously he will not be the red plate holder this week. With that being said, it does seem like Chase Sexton is slipping just a little bit. We saw him make that mistake in the whoop section as Malcom Stewart appeared to be closing in to make the pass on him. He did still salvage a very strong finish considering that his bike was damaged and he was having throttle cable issues. And technically speaking, he did extend his points lead. So all things considered, he is still in a good spot. Then behind him, we have Cooper Webb, who, in my opinion, it feels like is starting to become the favorite right now. We're heading to tracks that he does well on, generally speaking. And even though he hasn't won a race or shown anything really dominant so far this season, he's only 5 points behind Chase Sexton. So what is going to happen if he starts winning races? Next, kind of surprisingly, we have Jason Anderson, who is 17 points back, but he's been on the podium 3 times this season. And at least as of right now, he's still a championship contender. He's well within striking distance, but the 2 guys in front of him definitely seem to have more speed and more consistency. So that could definitely fade away even as soon as this weekend. But I also wouldn't be surprised to see him win a race this year or more. So keep your eye on Jason Anderson. The field has thinned out quite significantly, so he should probably be in your top 5 if you're playing fantasy. And there's a strong argument that he should be on the podium this weekend. Next, only 1 point behind him, we have Ken Roczen, who we saw crash out last weekend. Really hated to see that. Thankfully, he should be all right. He should be lining up. He's kind of at a turning point right now in the season. Do we see him kind of fade away and have a mediocre season like he usually does around this point in the season? Or can he turn things around and bounce back after that rough week last week and stay in this title fight? He's going to have to start winning some races if he wants to be in the title fight, and I definitely think he can win some races, but how bad are his bad races moving forward? He definitely can't have another weekend like he did last weekend. Personally, I look for him to be a top 5 guy moving forward, but I look for him to kind of just fade away out of this title fight, and it should start to narrow down between Cooper Webb and Chase Sexton. The only interesting thing will be what will happen if one or both of them also end up going out of the title, and all of a sudden it's just down to almost nobody. Next, we got to talk about Malcom Stewart. He's all the way up to 5th in the points by the time you remove the people who are no longer racing with us. And it was absolutely awesome to see him do what he did last weekend and get that win. There is some sense of comfort knowing these awesome riders like Plessinger and Malcom Stewart at least were able to put their names in the record books. And it is really cool to see the Stewart brothers become the first Premier Class Supercross winners. Nothing against Jet and Hunter Lawrence. It feels like they're probably going to accomplish that as well. But it also feels like the Stewart brothers should have accomplished that before them. They were racing much longer and much sooner, and it feels like they both should have won. They got it done. It was awesome to see. What a feel-good story. He's only 24 points back, less than a race behind the championship points leader, so you definitely cannot say he's out of this title fight. If he uses the momentum that he generated last weekend and goes on an absolute tear, he could claw his way into a title contender. We've already seen him go the whole season. He got 3rd in the championship before. He knows how to race all season long. Maybe he becomes a championship contender. So keep your eye on that situation. Then we have a pretty big jump back to Justin Cooper and Justin Barcia, who are only separated by 1 point. Feels like they're having 2 totally different seasons, but at the end of the day, they're both right there in the points. Pretty cool to see Justin Cooper showing the speed, and pretty frustrating to see him jumping through the whoops every single time like he was. We saw him going the same speed as Chase Sexton essentially after his crash when he was absolutely limping home to finish the race. Granted, Justin Cooper still did get a top 5 finish, but it wasn't pretty whenever he got to the whoop section. Kind of an interesting dynamic going on over there at Star Yamaha, where on the one hand you have Cooper Webb saying they told him to just go for it and blitz the whoops. We can't afford to be not blitzing the whoops. It's faster. You got to do it. We need to see you blitzing the whoops this season. And on the other hand, you have Justin Cooper, who just jumps them every time no matter what. And we saw him lose the race lead back in Anaheim due to that very reason. One thing you can't say about Justin Cooper, though, is that he's not consistent. He's been racing all the races. He hasn't been one that's made many injuries, so he definitely knows how to ride within his limits, and looks like he's doing that. So shout out to him. He's looking good, but it seems like he could look a lot better. Then behind them on an absolute island, we have Justin Hill, who is well out of reach of those 2 guys and well ahead of everybody else in the title fight. Really cool to see him this far up in the title already on a privateer team. Hopefully he can continue to have some standout results and continue to move forward in the championship. Next, I just quickly want to shout out Plessinger, who is all the way back in 13th in the points right now. Look for him to start moving forward and having some good results, especially as this field has thinned out. He's definitely had some tough luck this year, and he doesn't look too far off the pace, so he could definitely be a top 5 contender and maybe even get some podiums sometime soon. We are heading to Detroit this weekend, where he almost won that main event a couple years back, so don't count him out. Look for him to start flying up the point standings as well. Now, before we go ahead and talk about the schedule or the racetrack or what we saw in press day, I just quickly want to highlight one of the things that happened last weekend that was a little bit out of the mainstream media, and that was the beef between Kevin Moranz and Justin Starling. So this is something that you're definitely going to want to keep your eye on tonight. If you guys didn't already see it, you could see that Justin Starling ended up appearing to take out Kevin Moranz in the main event. Now, where this gets interesting is if you jump down in the comments of Kevin's Instagram video, Justin Starling actually jumped in there and said a few things, and one of those things was his defense, which was that essentially he's claiming to just be trying to block Kevin, and then he didn't realize he was coming around the outside. So when he went to block him on the outside, he went ahead and sent him over the turn. It wasn't intentional, and he expects Kevin to retaliate, and that he's okay with that. I'm not really sure exactly how Kevin feels, but listening to him talk in his vlog videos immediately after the race, he seemed to be under the opinion that Justin was very intentionally trying to take him out, and he was not a big fan of that. But there is an interesting dynamic here where they were essentially going to be on the same team. Kevin Moranz has created his own program, and it's a really solid program. He has almost like a full factory setup looking rig and really good stuff going on over there. He did bring Justin Starling under his camp to try to go ahead and have a 2-rider team this season, and for whatever the reason, they ended up not being able to follow through. It sounds like they had some different sponsor ideas, maybe some gear brands that, one rider didn't want to do when the other did. Either way, there was a falling out, and now we see this tangle up on the track. These 2 guys are around the same speed, both fighting right at that edge of trying to get in the main event. If by any chance they both end up in the LCQ or the same heat race, keep your eye on that battle. It's probably going to get pretty heated. I don't expect Kevin to hold back, especially after what he said after the race last weekend. Just thought I'd draw your guys' attention to that. Next, I just want to go ahead and let you guys know, just be aware that this weekend is a day race. We're starting much earlier, similar to what we did last year in Detroit. So race day live is going to be coming on at 9:30 Eastern, and the race itself is going to be starting at 3 Eastern. So if you're on the West Coast, you got to get your fantasy picks in early. You got to make sure that you have your ducks in a row. That's part of why I bring you guys this video. And now let's go ahead and talk about what we saw at press day. All right, so the first thing I want to draw you guys' attention to about press day is exactly where they were riding. So just to highlight that real quick, they were coming down the start straight this way, hitting the rhythm section, going through the back, twisting back around, and making this L formation, and that is it. So not much of a track preview there as far as, you know, the rest of the track. And we only saw a couple of factory guys there. I saw Max Anstie and Chance Hymas, but that was about it. The track looks pretty one-lined, even if you look at the area that they're not hitting. I mean, this looks like a triple-triple. Obviously, you do have this whip section here, which is, you know, looks like just a normal whip section. So not a lot of options, I don't think. Hopefully there's some separation in the sand section. Gonna be interesting to see how that breaks down. One thing I do want to point out though is we did see Max Anstie come in here and triple onto this tabletop. Most of everybody else was going double over the table to the single, triple, and double out. Looks like that could be a big time saver. The other thing worth pointing out here is that this little single was pretty rolled out, at least in press day, and you could technically jump from that up onto this and then over, but that looked pretty tough. Didn't see a lot of people doing that. The last thing I want to mention here on the track map is pretty much everybody was going double. It was pretty slow. And then I did see one person, I think Anthony Rodriguez, go triple single. That looked a lot better. So keep your eye out for that come race time. One other thing I thought was worth noting about press day is that even though it is snowing in Detroit right now, you would think the dirt would be pretty soft, and I'm sure it will break down and have ruts. But generally speaking, it did look a little bit hard packed for East Coast, and it looked like the dirt was holding up pretty well. So just keep that in mind. Guys like Jason Anderson, who do tend to fare a little bit better on hard packed tracks or just prefer hard packed tracks, might do a little bit better than you think tonight. Not saying he's going to win, but could that be enough of an advantage for somebody like Chase Sexton, who's probably going to go against Cooper Webb, who really does like those deep ruddy tracks? At the end of the day, I think the track breaking down is probably going to play a small factor, and what's going to be the biggest factor is going to be the start. Like I was saying, I do think the track is going to be pretty one-lined. I don't think there's going to be a ton of time to be made or lost on the track, so most of it's probably going to be based off of your starting position. Anyways, not a ton of takeaways from press day. Like I said, it was a small portion of the track with not a lot of the top riders there. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the last segment. All right, so if you guys stuck around this long in the video, first, I just want to say I really appreciate it. Your support on the channel really does mean a lot. So anyways, I did have a pretty crazy experience this week when I was at work. I was working down by the San Diego Bay when out of nowhere, there's this really loud sound of a fighter jet overhead. We look up and we see this F-18 come flying straight down into the bay. Bam. And wow, I cannot tell you guys, that was the loudest, most scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. Definitely some weird things going on with these airplanes and things like that right now. So I wanted to go ahead and share some of the stuff that I saw and have heard. It seems like the news is doing their best to cover it, but in my opinion, they don't really have the full story. I'm sure I don't necessarily have the full story either, but I can share with you guys what I've heard so far and also what I saw being there in person. So the airplane that crashed was the F-18 Growler. It's the electronic warfare version of the F-18. It's a very large fighter jet. It's about 60 feet long. So essentially what happened was the F-18 was coming in for a landing at Naval Air Station North Island. As it was coming in for a landing, for whatever the reason, I'm not sure if it touched down on the tarmac or not, but it ended up getting stuck at full thrust, full afterburners, and it, went across the runway. And as it got to the end of the runway area, the pilots ejected and the plane was essentially flying west towards the ridge of Point Loma. So the only thing really separating the Naval Air Station and Point Loma is the Bay of San Diego, and we started to notice that this particular plane was flying very low and very fast over the bay, which is not normal. They normally take a left turn and fly south in order to not fly over the ridge of Point Loma. Normally, you never see any planes coming up and over the ridge. So anyways, we kind of start to tune in like, yo, what is this pilot doing? He's kind of flying crazy. And then out of nowhere, he just shoots straight up into the air. And that really got a lot of people's attention because, for one, it was extremely loud and it was also really erratic flying behavior. And we're like, dude, what is this guy doing? Is he trying to get in trouble? Well, come to find out, obviously, at this point, there's nobody in the plane, which is obviously concerning. So the plane flies straight up into the clouds. It's a very, very cloudy day. The visibility was only a couple of 100 feet. So we hear the plane. It's really loud. We can't see it anymore. And it just kind of fades away. And we're all thinking, that was kind of weird. Okay, then. So everything kind of goes back to normal for a few seconds. And then we start to hear the plane again. And we're like, okay, what is this guy doing, man? Like, is he going to come back and buzz all the buildings? Like, what's going on? And then a few seconds later, he breaks the sound barrier and then immediately flies straight into the bay. Pretty much nose first. It was like maybe 20 degrees away from vertical. I cannot describe to you guys how loud and how earth-shattering that was. It was absolutely incredible. I was about 1,000 feet away when it happened. So keep in mind, there's no canopy on the airplane. The landing gear is down. He's in full afterburner in a direct descent. Well, there's nobody in the plane, but the plane is in full afterburner going straight down. He ends up breaking the sound barrier even with all of that, the landing gear down, no canopy on the plane. It absolutely rocks everything. And then we measured the depth of the bay where the impact was, and it was about 40 feet deep. And keep in mind, like I said, this was about a 60-foot long aircraft. So essentially, he's coming in at the speed of sound, or approximately 800 miles an hour, into this water nose first, into only 40 feet of water. So anyways, he goes in the water, water shoots up everywhere, sand shoots up everywhere. And then immediately after that, we see tons and tons of pieces of the plane floating to the surface, and the smell of jet fuel becomes almost unbearable. So shortly after that, we did learn that the pilots got out. We thought that they intentionally did that to the plane to get it to crash land safely, but come to find out, it was kind of chance that it landed there. Now, according to my understanding, the people that measured the depth of the bay also measured where the plane impacted into the sand at the bottom of the bay, and it did supposedly leave about a 10-foot crater at the bottom of the ocean. So pretty gnarly stuff going on there. Given the area that it crashed and all the sensitive things around, whether it be military, the submarines, fuel farms, all of the houses that are nearby, definitely absolute best case scenario. Nobody was injured. Thank God for that. But I just wanted to go ahead and share this story with you guys. I thought it was a little bit too crazy, and I was there way too firsthand not to share it. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video.